There hasn't been a Zealandism for like 2 to 3 days. I would like to blame the economy, the weather, the comfiness of my particular bed, whatever it happens to be. But actually, I was busy finishing the script for the Hidden Grounds that we've been working on, which is, of course, the series that my brother and I do where we travel to clubs and places around the world, and we take you there kind of Bourdain-ish, except instead of food, it's football or soccer, or whatever you feel like calling it. So I've finished the script for that. You have me again. You have my condolences for having to deal with me once again. But I do have one of my favorite topics for you today. Fucking nonsense, right? Because all we live for on this channel is nonsense. We talk about all the things that are happening in the football world, sure, but usually that's nonsense anyways. Now, people, and this is stupid of people, typically don't pay attention to World Cup qualifying when, I don't know, the World Cup's 2 years away, but they really should, because some weird, wet, and wild stuff has been happening that you need to be aware of, particularly with teams that you might not expect me to be talking about in World Cup qualifying 2 years before it's happening. Brazil. You ever heard of it? Beaches. Every good player ever, right? Like all of the important things that you need in a country. Jungle. Controversy. Sick flag. Like all of the things that you could possibly want. The problem is, their national team now sucks. You might think that I am over-exaggerating by saying that Brazil's national team sucks. What if I told you that after 8 matches, and mind you, there are only 18 matches in South American World Cup qualifying, all right? After 8 matches, Brazil is tied with, wait for it, Venezuela. Yes, if you had bet on that, you probably would have made a ton of money, but this is why betting is stupid, because nobody could have seen that coming. If you check out the way this is laid out here, 4 of the last 5 matches Brazil has played, it has lost, including matches to Colombia and matches to fucking Paraguay, which is, not a good team, typically. But Paraguay, to its credit, does have more wins than Brazil in its last 5 matches and, is only 1 point behind Brazil. You know who's also only 1 point behind Brazil right now? The boys from the mountains, Bolivia. And they actually managed to win a match on the road, which is just stunning, unbelievable. They went to Chile and won. Oh yeah, Chile sucks. They've got 5 points from 8 matches. The days of Arturo Vidal and Alexis Sanchez, they are way distant in the rearview mirror. Those multiple Copa America winning teams, they can't even sniff a World Cup qualification run right now. Probably because Venezuela is apparently on a hot streak because they're level with fucking Brazil, and they've only lost 1 of their last 5 matches here. But the focus is on Brazil, because how in the world does this possibly happen? I don't know. Brazil's lost half of its first 8 qualifying matches in South American World Cup qualifying. If you want to know how ridiculous that is, that Brazil is tied with Venezuela in qualifying, Venezuela is the only team you see in this entire image that has not been to a World Cup before. They are trying to make it to the World Cup for the very first time. Honestly, they're doing a pretty damn good job of it, right? This is not a case of getting FM'd or getting screwed, right? Brazil has only scored 9 goals in 8 matches that it's played. It hasn't even been able to run up the score against the bad teams that it's been going up against. Its one win was a 1-0 win at home against Ecuador. Now, I'm not saying Ecuador is a bad team. Ecuador made the last World Cup. They're very, very competent. They're super annoying to play against. Great structure, some speed, right? But this is Brazil, right? Brazil's in a different category. Brazil is the only team, true, fact, the only team that has played at every World Cup in the history of the World Cup. No other team has been to every World Cup. Only Brazil. And it just got easier to qualify out of South America. It used to be 4, and then there's a team that goes to a playoff. Right now it's 6, and there's a team that goes to a playoff. There's only 10 damn spots, okay? If you finish in the top 60% of South American qualifying, right? And we're just going to pretend that Guyana, French Guyana, and Suriname don't exist. And we're just saying if you finish in the top 60% of all of South America, you get to go to the World Cup for free. Then if you finish 7th, you go into the Intercontinental Playoff system where you will likely be the best team there. Because every team worth its salt is typically making it to the World Cup every time now, since it's been expanded to 48. Except for apparently Brazil. Brazil is 1 point. 1 out of failing to even make the playoff. Now, will Brazil probably be fine? Probably. But the fact that the word probably is involved here is ridiculous. This is the nation with the most talent, out of any nation in the world for the vast history that this game has been played. Now, in this particular moment, I would not make that case. I'd say France is probably the most talented team. You've got England involved in that conversation, and obviously Spain, because they've been absolutely rampant and that new generation's coming up and is about to take over the world. Argentina would also like a word, but I've always contended that Argentina is more than the sum of its parts, and I think that if you go, player for player between the Brazil team and the Argentina team, you're not going to find a lot of degrees of separation. I just think Argentina is a better team than Brazil is. Obviously, they have 18 points from their first 8 matches, and they're like frustrated with that. They've actually managed to lose 2 matches in qualifying, which is amazing because Argentina hadn't lost for 3 years, and by the way, had won the last World Cup. So even though Brazil is not at its apex of being the most talented, right? The expectation for the seller is so much higher than this. This is a nation with a national team pool that is so unbelievably, it's like the Marianas Trench of national team pools. They could go to the friggin' Croatian league and find 5 Brazilian guys that can probably hang, right? You can go to the top Malaysian league. You can go to China. You can go to the damn Chinese national team and find a couple of good Brazilian players that are holding their own. There's a couple on Qatar too or something. Like they're all over the place, right? There's a Brazilian playing in every top league in the world, it feels like. Probably multiple, and they're making the team of the year. This is the country where you can go to the beach and there's a dog that has more technical skill than half of the United States national team. How the fuck are you in, 5th place? How are you tied with Venezuela? How are you a point ahead of Bolivia? I watched the United States play against Bolivia. It looked like a varsity team playing a JV team. The United States won 4-0. It could have won 10-0. Bolivia was so bad, my eyes started to bleed. They have 9 points because they play at 25,000 feet above sea level. I have no idea how they managed to win a match on the road. That's amazing for them, and I hope they're doing better. But to be serious, to be so serious right now, Brazil should not be within, the distance between Mars and the Earth of Brazil in this standing. It just should not. This is wild. All of that is to say is what is happening is insane. Now, the Brazil coach, whose name I forgot, because, I do have a lot of storage space up here, but most of it's reserved for useless facts, geography, and history, and strategy gaming tips. So I don't remember the guy's name. I could Google it, but where's the fun in that? The coach for Brazil, who has apparently still not been fired and they let get on the plane back to wherever he was supposed to go, he came out and said that he believes in his team and that they're going to make the World Cup final. You have to make the World Cup to make the World Cup final. Or maybe he was using the official FIFA terminology where the World Cup final is just the World Cup and the actual World Cup is qualification and everything. If you're in the World Cup final, then you've made it to the final 48 teams, in which case he's probably right, but he's not definitely right, and that's terrifying. Also, Chile's really lucky because they are so bad right now, but I'm focused on Brazil because Chile should be getting the hands for this. How the hell do you fall apart as quickly as Chile has? I mean, a decade ago, Chile was winning back-to-back Copa Americas, and now they are sitting 4 points behind Bolivia, 4 points behind Paraguay, and 5 points behind Venezuela with no hope. They just lost at home against Bolivia. You do that, you might as well not play another match until World Cup qualifying starts up again. You just pack it in, right? And I want to say I'm also rooting for Bolivia and Venezuela to make the World Cup because I think that would be fun. And why would you not root for a team like that to be able to pull off something like that? And also, the team I'm pivoting to here is not as mainstay or big as Brazil, but they are not the only big team that is really, really struggling right now because Asia also played World Cup qualifying over this international break, and it got really uncomfortable for Australia because Asia started this, they have a new qualifying format because 8 Asian teams make it automatically, basically. What they've done is divided 18 teams into 3 groups of 6. And if you finish in the top 2, you go automatically. And then if you finish in the second 2, you go into this kind of extra group stage that happens later. Now, Group C was already pretty brutal, right? You had Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Australia, which are 3 nations that regularly expect to be at the World Cup. Australia's been to 5 straight. Saudi Arabia just beat Argentina at the last World Cup. And Japan, can't get out of the round of 16, but they're a regular sight in the round of 16 at the World Cup. Japan, they did fine. They won matches against Bahrain and China. They basically sent China back to the Qing dynasty with a 7-0 win. The Chinese team bus was getting attacked when they landed in China. It was ugly. It was, some egg on the face for the regime sort of nonsense. Saudi Arabia did draw against a rampant Indonesian side, but managed to go to China and win. They didn't do it nearly as convincingly, but Saudi Arabia is probably feeling okay. Indonesia is also probably feeling okay with that draw because that's a sick result for Indonesia in Saudi Arabia. But we're not paying attention to Saudi Arabia because Australia at home started its qualifying campaign by losing to a sentient oil drum, Bahrain. Okay, look, Australia always does this. As somebody that is an avid follower of World Cup qualifying, Australia always does this. And then they find some tap dancing goalkeeper that's able to make a few penalty saves. They knock out Peru and then make it to the World Cup anyways. Australia has not comfortably qualified for the World Cup in a decade, even though they've been to 5 straight. They had an intercontinental playoff 2 World Cups ago where they had to go to extra time against Syria in the Asian playoff to get to play Honduras, who they then beat to go to the World Cup. And then in the last World Cup, they had intercontinental playoffs again, which they scraped their way into, and then they beat Peru in penalties. Australia are magicians at this, but they might be putting themselves in a position that is a little too difficult to overcome because they did not score in 2 matches, and they didn't have to play Japan or Saudi Arabia. They lost at home 1-0 to Bahrain, who, as much as I made fun of them earlier, to give them credit, has been a competent national team for a long time, kind of just behind where Qatar's been. Qatar obviously won the Asian Cup, but Bahrain's the type of team that can make a quarterfinal at the Asian Cup and you don't bat an eye, right? They've gotten good results in qualifying. They've just never shown the ability to beat the best teams until now when they beat Australia. But then, of course, they lost to Japan 5-0 in the next match, so it's not like Bahrain is that good. And then, of course, Australia drew Indonesia, but Indonesia also drew Saudi Arabia, so you can't say that that's that bad. And Indonesia is clearly feeling good about itself. But Australia has a point from its first 2 matches. It still has 4 matches left against Japan and Saudi Arabia of the 8 matches that it has left to play, and it has to finish in the top 4. There's a problem with that because the 2 teams it just played and failed to beat are the teams that are currently 3 and 4 in the table. Bahrain is not going to beat Japan. Doesn't look like anybody's going to beat Japan right now, but Bahrain looks like it can hang with everybody else in this group. And Indonesia just went and drew Saudi Arabia and just went and drew Australia, which means Indonesia has 4 matches of its last 8 against Bahrain and China. And China's just bad, right? In spite of the few Brazilians that it happens to have on its team at the moment, right? And so it is very possible that Bahrain and Indonesia are going to put up some solid points in this group. And if Australia starts to show up and get rocked by Japan and drop close ones against Saudi Arabia, Australia could not make it to the final round of Asian qualification. I mean, they have certainly set themselves up for failure in this particular situation. Now, also in this qualifying group, Qatar and North Korea drew. I have no other reason to point that out other than the fact that it was just an absurd match played in what was essentially a puddle in North Korea that ended in a 2-2 draw with a red card going to, I can't remember who. Somebody got a red card. Yong Kook Choi got a red card in the 28th minute for North Korea. But North Korea is still very much alive for a World Cup spot, which is a lot of fun. Qatar did lose to the UAE 3-1. So I'm sure one, sheik or whatever is laughing at the other one, so good for them. And then in the other group, there was a bit of stumble out of the gate from South Korea. The really incredible Palestinian national team managed to get a draw. Coming off their run to the Asian Cup knockouts that captured the imagination, they drew South Korea. The problem is they followed it up with a loss against Jordan, who now finds itself on top of the group. But if you're going to get a weird team to automatically qualify for the World Cup, I'm assuming South Korea is going to be fine. They turned it around with a win against Oman, which, oh man, they're actually a pretty good team. One of Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, Palestine, or Oman will be automatically qualifying for the World Cup. My bet is on Iraq long term, but I think literally any one of those teams has shown the ability over the last 4 years to pull that off. So that group, nothing super weird happening outside of Palestine and South Korea drawing to start play, but it is going to be really interesting to track how it closes down. And if you're thinking this is all going to happen a year and a half from now, it won't. Asia, unlike Africa and everybody else, gets its qualifying done incredibly early. There's another group stage to play after this, and basically in the international windows, you're going to be getting Asian World Cup qualification, and you're going to be getting videos like this talking about Asian and South American World Cup qualification. Now, nobody else has really started yet, so I don't have anybody else to make fun of. I mean, Africa has technically started, but they were doing AFCON qualification the last time that we were looking at this. But still, Rwanda's top of the group. Believe in something. Rwanda's top of the group.